You know, let me say at the outset that, like virtually every American, I'm glad he's gone. He got what he deserved. He knew this day was coming. We knew this day was coming. The only question was whether he would die of some normal ailment before, American forces got to him. So good riddance. And, you hope in some tiny little way this gives some sort of closure and comfort to those who are, the loved ones or close friends of those who died on 9/11. The part that was hard for me to understand is the chanting. I was watching CNN when the president, at about, it was late, 10:30, Ben, was it? I don't know when it was, but late. We were watching CNN, and the president came on and made the announcement. And then, of course, CNN does the analysis afterwards, and they keep cutting away to their guy in the field who's, was it outside the White House, Ben? He was outside of somewhere, and he's got the crowd in the background, and they're chanting, USA, USA, like it was some sort of Olympic victory. And all I could think of was that, while it's understandable that people would be jubilant, I wasn't sure that these people in the crowd who were so jubilant understood exactly what this guy had done to us. I'm not sure it's a triumph sort of period. It's sort of like a Pyrrhic victory. I think the, analogy or metaphor for what he did was he came up and stabbed us in the back and gave us a potentially mortal wound where we could bleed to death very easily. We turned around and killed him, and then we laughed in his face. I'm not so sure he would be upset with the results. I think this guy got exactly what he wanted every step of the way. If you take 3 steps back and you look at this guy and you try to view how Osama bin Laden is going to be seen 1,000 years from now, he's an amazing figure. That guy did what he did, and to watch the dominoes and the ramifications of what he did continue to tumble, the man turned history 90 degrees at least, and we're living with the ramifications. And I don't think they're positive, and people are chanting, USA, USA. It's almost like they don't know how bad the wound is, that is bleeding from our back. The guy wanted to die a martyr. He died a martyr. This is a guy who Robert Fisk interviewed several times, and this is a guy who was legitimately jealous of people who blew themselves up as part of, the holy wars that he sent them out to fight. That's how he wanted to die. And what's more, that's the way it's going to be most appreciated by the sort of people who saw him in a more positive light. That's a heroic death. So we're chanting USA, and we just gave that guy the best propaganda victory he was likely to get in his life again. Nonetheless, I'm glad he's gone. So how do you get a chance to turn around what happened and then eventually really triumph? Well, I think you have to undercut the things that guy tried and succeeded in doing, and wonder if it's even, one of the reasons we're pessimistic in a lot of the shows we do lately is because I'm not sure it's possible to undo the damage that this guy did. But if you want to celebrate and really claim victory, that's the front this war's fought on. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what he did, because I'm not sure we've put this into real perspective. No one will argue with the idea that the 9/11 attacks was a turning point moment in American history. It was meant to be. Osama bin Laden's comments are recorded before these attacks, for 10, 15 years before these attacks, and he talks about things that make much more sense now that you look back on them after the attacks. One thing he said was that the attacks would have an effect all out of proportion to the damage done because they were directed at a country that hadn't seen war on its soil, in 100 years. He had talked about how if you blow up a building and a lot of people are killed in a country that's used to having bombs explode, it's not that big of a deal. You do it in a tranquil, peaceful place that hasn't known war, and the place is likely to freak out. The place freaked out. This man is responsible for us being in Iraq. Now, we didn't have to go into Iraq, but he certainly provided one of the excuses for that. 9/11 doesn't happen. We're probably not in Iraq. Well, probably never had the boots on the ground. I should clarify that because we were already, doing no-fly zones and all that stuff. But this guy doesn't attack us on 9/11. We're certainly not in Afghanistan. What have those wars done to us? We're taking off our shoes at airports. We're living with amazing amounts of security when judged by pre-9/11 standards. Who's responsible for that? That's that knife wound in the back, folks, continually bleeding long after we've, cut Osama's head off. You want to pick it up and laugh at it? It might laugh back.
At dancarlin.com. Visit the website at dancarlin.com and get involved with the community discussion.
Ben is sick again, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. Ben is sick. Ben is having a self-esteem crisis, and it has to do with a slur made by the President of the United States. Decision, and see what that means. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is it's going to cost an unbelievable amount of money for anyone to get in a position of power in this country. It already cost a ton, but the numbers are going to skyrocket. You're not going to know who gave it, and no matter what the promises you get from these people running for office are, they're going to listen to the people that show up the day after they get into office who are waving the cash in front of their face. Now, who that person is at any given time is going to be different depending on the issue, du jour. In the credit card swipe fee issue, it's the retailers on one side and the big banks on the other. But when do you get to be at the table? When do you get to command the attention of the legislators? How much is 1,000 phone calls from a bunch of constituents to your U.S. congressman or senator's office going to make against real money from some outlet on the opposite side of the issue? We've said for a long time on this program that words are important when you're talking about the problems our country faces. If you say we have disagreements and issues over campaign finance reform, that makes it sound like an issue we're, wrangling with, and that there's, a middle ground somewhere and we're trying to strike a balance, and it's an ongoing fight between general political opinions that just differ on the merits of the case. You get a whole different reaction than if you call it corruption. Corruption requires action. No one gets up and defends corruption. That story about the credit card swipe fees is an example of something that indicates our corruption. No one asks for your opinion in that debate at all. The only time the consumer ever even comes into it, the average American, is when one side, the banks, or the other side, the retailers, is trying to get the public on their side. So they say, well, the banks are screwing you with this. And then the banks say, no, the retailer's passing on that fee to you. We're pawns in their game. And we're pawns because we don't have the cash. And if we did have the cash, we would use it on something, that we needed desperately. Housing, food, jobs, whatever it is. Their cash does something totally different. To get back to the monologue, why aren't things in our Bill of Rights more important to our legislators? Why isn't freedom more important to our legislators? Well, you remember that old line about, freedom isn't free? But I don't exactly see a bunch of pro-freedom advocates with a lot of money going to Washington, to pay our legislators for it. And in this political system we have now, if you aren't coming in with money to get our legislators' attention, and someone on the other side of the issue is, you can predict the outcome. And even if you win, and even if you get the legislation passed, you won. You liberals, you got your health care, didn't you? But the people with the money got the loopholes put into the health care, and they designed the way the health care is. And in the end, you people who fought so hard for health care aren't going to feel like you got what you fought for, because the other people had money and you just had votes and calls to your congressman and poorly funded advocacy groups. Welcome to democracy in the 21st century. It's corruption. Pity we don't call it that. But of course, if we did and we could get both parties' legislators to admit that that's what it is, somebody'd have to do something. And listen, in Washington today, nobody works for free. If you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear it from you. Dan at dancarlin.com is the way to get a hold of me. Listen, I'm going to give you an email here. You want to know if Ben's real? Send some emails to him. He deserves to get a little bit of my traffic. Ben at dancarlin.com. Do you answer emails, Ben? We're going to find out 10, 12, 14 days for the first time in a long time. I can actually say that and mean it because this show came out a little early. We ought to have another one of these audio commentaries for you. Until the next time, I'll leave you with that.
If you think the show you just heard is worth $1, Dan and Ben would love to have it. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you can help keep the common sense coming. $1 a show. It's all we ask. Go to dancarlin.com for information on how to donate to the show.